This evening we are addressing parshas VAYISHLACH. VAYISHLACH is the story of Yaakov who leaves his father Lavan, father-in-law's house, and he travels back to the land that God had promised his fathers and promised he and all of the Jewish people. And in this chapter, we're going to read primarily, and tonight I would like to deal with this in this class, this lecture, what's in a name, calling the mazel of the name, and what's the significance between Yaakov becoming Yaakov when he's born, Jacob, and what about when he becomes Israel, when Hashem says to him, "You shall no longer be called Israel." So we're going to talk about, what's in a name and how does that translate and have representation even in our lives today. All of us, especially those who get older, as we get older and more mature, hopefully we've gone through a lot of experiences that have challenged us and helped us to grow, right? And in being challenged and growing, we can genuinely say to a lot of people, we're not the same people we used to be. Hopefully we're smarter. Some people don't get smarter. It seems like some people continue to live life after one controversy after another and living in strifeful situations after another. I'm surprised often when I watch some type of television program or news and hear about what seemingly should be mature adults going through things that you think this is silly. I mean, I know a lot of people like in this community, and I don't see those types of controversies and strifes going on. So there is something different about that. Yaakov is told, or we understand his name is being called Yaakov when he comes from the womb because he had grabbed the hold of his brother's heel. So there's one translation of his name being called the heel grabber, right? But then his brother calls him what later on? The deceiver. So does his name mean heel grabber or deceiver? Or is this only what his brother Esau called him, was the deceiver, and yet he was called the heel grabber? Nevertheless, it appears that Yaakov's name, in its meaning, had the context of one who will trip you up if he gets an opportunity, or grab a hold of your heel. And then later on, we see Yaakov go to spend 20 years with his father-in-law, in which he immensely struggled to get out of the grasp of his father-in-law. At the same time, struggled to get the woman that he really loved, because we knew that he loved one woman and he was given another, the sister of that woman. And at some level, he was tricked himself into staying longer to have this wonderful woman that he loved so much. He has children. He leaves, and just about the time he thinks his struggles are over with, he goes into this confrontation with what was going to be his brother Esau. During this visit before seeing his brother, an angel appears to him, and he wrestles with the angel of Esau, it says, according to tradition. It seems that Esau's angel wanted to come and somehow challenge Yaakov. He wrestles with him all night long. And in the struggle, he is told in Genesis the 23rd chapter, verse 29, he says, "No longer shall your name be called Yaakov," or Jacob, "rather Israel shall be your name. For you have struggled with the divine and with men, and you have prevailed." What is the difference between Yaakov and Israel? Two opposites, very good. How are they opposites? Can you explain? How is the difference between Yaakov and Israel? You notice that when Abraham is spoken to about his name, God says, now God gave Abraham a new name, right? It was added the hey on his name. And from that point on, he says, no one, it's actually against the Torah to speak the name of Abraham by the shortened version that he was called. I don't know if you knew that. Even to this day, when you read the Torah and it just gives the shortened name, you're not to say the shortened name. Why? Because Hashem said, you shall no longer be called so-and-so, but you should be called Abraham. The same language is used for Yaakov, but the Torah continues to address Yaakov as Yaakov and sometimes as Israel. And if you'll go back and look from this point on in chapter 32, verse 29 forward, Yaakov, all the way up to the time of Egypt and Joseph, you see Joseph or Yaakov being addressed as Yaakov at times and then Israel at times. Why the difference? Why does the Torah talk about his old name in some cases and not the other? Well, the difference between Yaakov and Israel is this. Yaakov is considered the servant of Hashem. Israel is considered the child. Does it make sense? A child of God. See the difference between the two? Now, some would think, well, Yaakov represents struggle, correct? Strife, difficulties, suffering, pain. Israel represents what? Spiritual maturity, unique connection to Hashem. But does it mean no struggle, no pain? For sure not. Why do we know this for sure? Because Yaakov's suffering and difficulties didn't end when his name was changed. So what changed about Yaakov? The way he reacted to the situation.
And I think that's what changes us too.
Absolutely.
We don't have the situations.
Correct.
But it's how we take
How we take ownership to it. So if you'll remember in the lesson, last week we talked about the struggle of two nations. You know, we each have both the positive and negative sides of our character, of our nature. We have the Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tov, and these kind of struggles between the two puts a pitched battle in our lives. But there's a purpose for all of these difficulties and struggles. It is to ultimately get us to where we operate not in the Yaakov role, but in the Israel role. You understand the difference between the two? I mean, there's going to be the redemption of his people, and over the prophets talk about the union of Israel and Yaakov. Even the prophets talk in that same language. Sometimes they use the word Israel, sometimes they use the term Yaakov. Why do they talk about the descendants of Yaakov versus the descendants of Israel? Are they two different groups of people? No. But in essence, they are two groups of people who are at a different level. Does that make sense? Do you operate like a Yaakov, meaning that you go through your struggles and you still love Hashem? You're not in sin. This is not a sinful state. This is a different perspective, a different way of looking at your relationship with God and the troubles that you have. Say again? It's a completely different frame of mind. Absolutely. Something happened with Yaakov, Jacob, when he was with his father-in-law, and maybe it was just maturity. Maybe he just realized good things are worth fighting for. Right? Well, obviously he learned that, because what did he gain from this whole relationship with his father-in-law, that he waited for the 22 years to get the woman that he truly loved? And so good things are worth waiting for. Good things are worth being patient for. But here he is fighting with this angel, knowing that he was in contact with the very messenger of Hashem. I mean, he understood that, I mean, in some texts we understand he wrestled with Hashem almost, right? So he knew, at this moment, I have to seize the moment, and if I don't get what I am destined to receive in this world, then I will probably always remain the person who struggles. I will always be the person who struggles and not achieves. Now, the difference between a person in this world that has reached a level of spiritual connection is not that they don't struggle anymore. We all struggle. The difference is how, as you said, we respond to the situation and how that situation affects us. What does it do to me? Let's go through some practical examples. You're informed by your physician that you have a very, very serious illness. Terminal. Do you react by it by humbling yourself before the Creator and placing the burden of responsibility on the Creator Himself and trusting Him and going, this is just the way it is, and I'm going to trust the Creator, but I'm not going to allow this to destroy me and my family? Or do you let it destroy you and your family? I've seen some amazing people that I thought were of great, great faith. When they were pronounced to have a terrible disease, their life fell apart. And I watched them go through months of struggle and anger and bitterness toward God. And in one case, so surprised me that this person took her last breath as one who felt that God had failed her. There never was reconciliation between the whole thing. And then I've seen other people that I thought were of very little faith, very little, almost zero, start on this journey toward their death and become a great, great master of their emunah toward Hashem. Amazing. So the difference between the Yaakov and the Israel, something transforms within a person. Now, can we say that what transformed is so supernatural that you can't make that change or you can't do that change? I'm not sure that one is in complete control of how or when that change takes place. But I'm convinced thoroughly that what this is about is demonstrated in the story with Yaakov and this angel. Yaakov goes back to this place in which he contemplates and thinks in his evening prayer about his relationship with his brother, knowing that he could be facing his death and possibly the death of many of his clansmen, people in his family. This is a very serious moment. And when this angel and this figure comes to him, they engage in a mortal combat. I mean, it is a fight to the finish. And he refuses to let go until he gets an answer. I think for every one of us in this room are very much like many hundreds, if not thousands of people throughout this world that are connected to Torah, as you guys are, that found yourself in the place of your life that you wouldn't give up until you got an answer. You would keep searching until you found an answer. You searched the pages of Torah. You searched the pages of the classic masters of Torah until you found the connection with Hashem. And it changed your life. I mean, every one of us in this room can testify of how connecting to God in that unique highest level changed everything about you. And it wasn't because it was some religious experience necessarily. It wasn't some, I guess, like one day you woke up and cherubims were singing to you. That wasn't the case. It's just that in your study of Torah, something changed in your disposition toward your life. So the difference between Yaakov and Israel is how you look at the world around you, how you process things around you. Look at what happened when Yaakov's son is sold to slavery. Breaks his heart. Breaks his heart. But what we discover is that Yaakov, as being Israel, was a man that completely trusted what Hashem's providence was. He completely trusted Hashem. I know there were times he didn't trust his sons. Did he not? He didn't. Didn't trust him at all. Did that trust manipulate him into doing emotional things that were not proper? No. He was a constantly focused individual. Yet his trust in Hashem helped to save all of his family during the famine. Ultimately, this trust that he had in Hashem brought about the restoration and the growth of all the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel became a mighty nation, not in the land of Israel, but in Egypt. Which is kind of interesting, because how does Israel become more mature? Not in the land, but in Egypt. So there's something to the fact that struggle is what life is about. And as soon as we connect to God in this unique way, where we don't look at struggle as something to defeat us, rather as something to promote us and to get us to a higher level, then we will actually be happy about the struggle and full of joy about the struggle. Now that's the hard challenge right there. How many of us wake up and say to Hashem, I look forward to the test that I'm going to have this week? We don't do that, right? If anything, we're like, oh God, let things always work out smooth. But see, I really do believe the secret to this is, first of all, accepting the fact that there are going to be tests. But at the same time, knowing that there are going to be tests, if one completely transforms their character into righteous character, and they transform their mental faculties to perform out mitzvahs and study of Torah, things start smoothing out. It's amazing. Now, does that mean that I will not get up tomorrow morning and have a disagreement or argument with my spouse? No. But the likelihood of that, if I have an argument with my spouse, it will quickly be resolved and taken care of, and it won't end up into some escalated plate throwing, cussing. Of course, this never happens in my house. No, it doesn't. Trust me. Hopefully, you're all going, oh, why is he talking about plate throwing? I'm thinking of my uncle's house. Anyway, no. There are some violent homes. But anyway, so the difference is that Yaakov becomes, in essence, and we don't use this term in Judaism very often, but a spiritual warrior, right? He connected to Hashem in a unique way. And that is what we have to do. We have to take, if we're expected to operate, is to not operate as Yaakovs, but as Israels. But to operate as Israels is not, as a person of Israel, does not mean that you're now going to step into a role where you don't have problems anymore. Do what now?
You're not going to step into a place where you do everything.
No, you won't. But your total outlook is completely different. I hope I'm getting over to you with what I mean. There was a character. I'm trying to think of the name of the World War II movie that was back done in the 60s or 70s or something like that. It was called The Dirty Dozen or something like that. The guy that was the tank driver in that, I'll think of him in a second. He does all the... No, not Lee Marvin. He's a tank driver. I'll think of his character in a second. He does the orange juice commercials now. I recognize his voice anywhere. Does car commercials. He's an older gentleman now. But anyway, in this, he was the sort of precursor to the hippie. I don't know why they had this in the World War II movie, but he was the precursor to the hippie. He was the guy with the beard, with that leather tank helmet. But he was always like, hey, man, don't worry. Everything's cool, you know. It's like he's so mellow. Donald Sutherland, that's it. Remember Donald Sutherland? He's still like that, right? But, you know, everything's going on, and he's, you know, everybody else is all uptight, and he's like, man, just chill out. It's going to be okay. It's going to be cool. And, you know, to me, that was like the essence of a guy who either was really an idiot or he figured out a secret in life to, even the worst of times, just keep a cool head and keep smiling, and everything's going to be okay. And in reality, that is true emunah. Now that I'm on this side of my life, I realize, wow, that's the connection right there. That is how you live life so much better. And it doesn't mean the problems are not there and that they're going to go away. It's when you begin to see things through the eyes of the essence of faith and your connection and trust with God, things become so much different. I can't even explain it. It's the problems are there, the difficulties are there, the struggles are there, but it's so much easier to go through a problem with a smile than a frown. Correct?
When you don't give them as much value as you do.
Absolutely. Think about this. Did you guys see the video that I posted up with radio talk show host? No. It's a video. He's talking about joy is a problem. The problem with joy or something like that. I'll think of it in a second. Post it on my Facebook. Outstanding video. You've got to watch this video. Because he talks about having joy in life. He says no one wants to be around a morose person. No one. Bottom line, and not even the morose person wants to be around another person like them. That's why they say a morose person always marries a joyful person, right? And you just never see two joyful people together. If they do, it's the most amazing relationship in the world. If both of them. But one of the things that he said was a powerful concept that does come from Judaism. Joy is not about a state of existence with everything going good for you. Joy is a state of mind. It's what you do and how you perform your life. And we all know it, and I liberally quote this as a quote from Rabbi Nachman, but it's not one of his quotes. It's an Americanized quote of Rabbi Nachman. Fake it till you make it, right? Act happy, you'll be happy. If you perform happiness on your exterior, your soul will catch up to that joy and happiness. Does that make sense?
Joy is a result.
Joy become a result of it. So, the other day we took Elijah and some of the men went to the gun range, and on the way home, Elijah gave me a big hug and a kiss, and he says, this has been the best day of my life. It's the happiest day of my life. And I said, well, that's good, Elijah. I'm glad you feel that way. I said, but happiness is being happy, not doing happy things. And I says, and he's young. I realize he's young. He thinks that happiness is having happy things happen. You get older, you realize happiness is not having happy things happen to you. Because you can be very miserable and depressed and have everything good going for you. Right? Now, I'm not talking about clinical depression. If a person has proper depression, you get medication, you need to do it. Right? But at the same time, we can be instruments of our own happiness, not because if you're waiting for happy things to happen to you, you're rarely going to be happy. You're just rarely going to be happy. So I want to look at some of the things that how to challenge obstacles in our life. Okay, yes, sir.
Before you go on, I got a definition here for Israel, which it breaks it out.
Mm-hmm.
Israel is he who strains himself to return to his roots.
Right.
One who wishes to go by the path of the Creator is called Yasharel, which is considered Yasher, which means straight, and Lael to God, meaning that he wants everything he does to raise straight to the Creator and does not wish to have any other aim.
Very, very good. That's beautiful. So what we're going to talk about now is this very thing, is a person who is not operating as the Jacob, rather the Israel, is a person who, with all of their might and all their strength and their force of will, are attempting to reconnect back to the source or connect to the source. None of us are ever disconnected from the source. Who is the source? Hashem. He's the source. But it's this constant effort to keep a connection to Him. And in this connection, it means that there's a constant effort in our daily life and our daily struggles. And it comes down to this: how do I deal with obstacles in my life? All barriers and obstacles which confront a person have only one purpose. One: to heighten his yearning for the holy deed, which he needs to accomplish. This is according to the Rabbi Nachman. It is part of man's nature that the greater the barrier stands in the way of a certain goal, the more he desires to achieve it. Right? Well, pretty much that's common sense. When a person needs to do something whose purpose is to strengthen his very core, especially when it is something upon which his whole being as a godly person to travel to righteousness or to become a tzaddik, he is given desire from above. The desire is created through the barrier which is sent to him, and the barrier itself causes his yearning to grow. Now, let me explain this. I'm going to ask this as a rhetorical question. Don't expect you to answer it. How many of you felt like, what is the purpose of studying? Because there are just some things it doesn't seem to sink in. I seem to study, I try to grasp a hold of it, and I still have my own personal faults, my own personal failures. What good is it to try to strive to study Torah and to do mitzvahs, and yet I'll do something as stupid as X, Y, Z? You know what I'm talking about. The whole purpose behind that is to cause you to yearn. Because if you had no effort in getting it done, you more than likely would not even perform the effort. You wouldn't do it. If I knew without any doubt that I could be an expert gymnast without ever taking a gym class, do you think that I would take a gym class? No. And therefore, I wouldn't become a gymnast. So if that is the case for any natural thing in the world, what is this like for the level of becoming a tzaddik in your life, to reach for the highest level of righteousness? How do we reach? We have to look at our own failings and realize these obstacles in my life are created for the very purpose to bring about more yearning. So the greater the goal for which you yearn, the bigger the obstacles and barriers. So what is your spiritual goal right now? What is your connection as an Israel, not a Yaakov? Is it to connect to him in the highest level of mitzvah? Then I'm going to tell you right now, your biggest challenge is to do the mitzvahs. Just the way it is. It's supposed to be that way. Airplanes rise and go to high, lofty levels because of resistance and turbulence. Right? Eagles fly hundreds of feet in the sky because of resistance and turbulence. How do we ascend to higher levels? Through resistance and turbulence. Obstacles appear like at no other time when we are at the single point in which Hashem wants to elevate us. So, this being said, when you all of a sudden see a number of obstacles coming your way, challenges to your emotions, to your psyche, to your relationships, understand that when all of these things come at one time, quit looking at the problem and start looking at the fact that this problem is going to result in something changing inside of you. That's a beautiful thing to be at, a level to be at. When you go to work and some difficulty comes up and you go, okay, this is like the third thing this week. I'm not the reason why these things have come up. Somehow Hashem's getting ready to teach me something. He's going to give me an opportunity to elevate and go to the next level. There are always difficulties and obstacles when you try to do anything holy. This is especially true when you want to make a journey to a very specific level of connecting to Hashem. Right? You need fierce determination. This reminds me of Yaakov when I hear this. You need fierce determination. You must strengthen your desire and willpower in proportion to the greatness of the goal you are aiming for. Then you will succeed in breaking barriers and attaining your goals. There is no barrier in the world which a person cannot break so long as he desires to and will to do so, and the will to do so. So what do I do with the obstacles I have? How do I get around them? Do I pray that the obstacles go away, or do I pray for a solution to the obstacles? We should be praying.
I pray to see it.
Pray for strength, right?
I pray to see how I'm supposed to handle that.
Right.
In all its intricacies.
Right.
And it's a struggle.
So let me ask you, if we prayed for Hashem to remove the obstacles from our life, do you think He will? If you're seeking to be a Zadik, no. It's just not going to happen. You're going to have the obstacles. And let me tell you, the one that's the most discouraging obstacle, I think, is one that seems permanent.
Yeah.
That's the one that's difficult. But if it's permanent, then you have to realize that there must be a very serious eternal purpose behind my permanent problem of physicality, in physicality. Makes sense? If I know that I am permanently attached to a difficulty that will always be a challenge to me connecting at a higher level, I will constantly deal with this in my life. You must know that it is the most important thing in your life that is going to bring eternal reward. How you respond to it is going to bring you the greatest reward. Not everybody has to deal with the same kind of problems, right?
But Jacob had the limp. That's what he
Jacob had the limp.
That's what reminded him.
Right.
That's why we have illnesses.
Every situation, you know that it's a permanent thing. You know that this is a permanent difficulty, that this will not go away. Therefore, it will be impossible for me to connect at the level that I really like to connect to Hashem. Do what?
I've heard where you couldn't have a Super Bowl if you didn't have, for the men out there.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
An opponent that is fierce and an opponent that
absolutely
puts the merit in having, a champion or whatever.
No, absolutely. So the idea, you said something too. What did you just say? Depressing. Okay. Let me help you here.
Really, but it's just, I mean.
Okay, but let me tell you, this is the problem. Let me tell you. Most of us, where we want to connect to Hashem and where we want to ascend to in our connection to Hashem, is often not what Hashem is wanting. Right? Like, for example, there are some people that I know that would desperately love to be able to convert to Judaism. They are connected to Torah as B'nai Noach, but wants to become a covenant Jew. They can't do it because they live in a country where they can't move out. They don't live anywhere near a Jewish community. It is impossible for them to connect. For that person, which means their lifetime desire and yearning will never be filled on this earth. Now, what will that do? That will either cause them to connect to Hashem in the way that He probably wouldn't even ever connect if he became a Jew. You follow? His desire, his yearning so huge that he's automatically connected to Hashem, or she's already connected to Hashem at the highest level. And if she or he converted, he might just end up falling into a lifestyle that has no yearning. And I would rather my entire life be trouble so that my yearning will always remain. Yes?
Yearning plus appreciation.
Absolutely. Yearning and appreciation. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you're talking about a very intense, intimate relationship with Hashem.
Right. But in essence, that is what Hashem is wanting from all of His children, is a very intense relationship. It's the difference between being a servant in the household and a child in the household. There's a huge difference in those roles. A child in the household is able to be around his father, his mother, and see and have experienced the ups and downs of family life. A servant can't even live at that level with a master. Can't live at that level. It's a big difference.
But he can see the intimacy that goes on with the family and yearn for that.
Right. Absolutely. So for example, a child that seeks to have a family, an adopted child, is very much like I was talking about the person who's B'nai Noach, who would like to be a Jew but can't. They have the yearning to be in a family, and they're not going to be there. With Rabbi Nachman's words on that last statement, says there is no barrier in the world which a person cannot break so long as he has the desire and the willpower. He continues on, he says, nor should a person try to find an excuse to exempt himself. So for example, your problems are so difficult, this obstacle's so hard, that's not an excuse. Now we're told we can't really, that you can't even use that as an excuse. It's too big for me to get around. It's impossible for me to do. It may be true that the desire and the yearning to achieve something holy are good in themselves, and that even if the barriers prevent him from accomplishing the holy deed, the fact is it will still account to him as if he has achieved it because of his intention. His intention was good. The sages of blessed memory did indeed say that if a person intended to do a mitzvah and was prevented from doing it, it is accounted to him as if he what? Did it. Brachot 6. This applies to someone who wants to feel that he at least fulfilled the minimum that is required of him. After all, what could he do? He wanted to succeed, but circumstances prevented it. But it is different for someone who does not merely want to feel as if feel he has done his duty, but actually wants the mitzvah or the holy deed itself. What good is it for him to know that as a special concession, it will be accounted to him as if he had achieved it because he had desired to succeed? So the idea is this: is an individual cannot approach a mitzvah knowing, or you can, if you can fully achieve it, and you give yourself an excuse to say, well, at least if I gave I tried and I didn't do it, it still counts for me. That actually doesn't count for you because your motive was to do it. Your intent was to not really do it, but to put the effort as if you were trying to do it to get credit for it. Does that make sense? You didn't actually do anything, okay? But the intent, though, is when you have true intent and merit to do these things, or you deeply desire to want to do these things.
So you didn't even do it in thought and action or in your heart.
You worked hard to. You're talking about a person who doesn't do it. Oh yeah, for example, they're going to say, oh, they have an opportunity to give charity, right? And they're half-hearted, and the opportunity passes them by. They didn't really give a good effort to try to make it happen. They go, oh, well, I got credit for at least I thought about it. No, it's not about that. It's about a person who's really went the extra mile to try to get it done and didn't happen. That effort counts for nothing. That effort does count for something big. There are people who, after a whole lifetime of materialism, suddenly feel a strong desire to walk the path of God. The tribute of judgment then rises up against him. It tries to prevent him from following the way of God by creating barriers. The unintelligent person, when he sees these barriers, starts to retreat. But someone who understands takes this as the very signal that he should draw closer. He understands that God is to be found in the barrier itself. The truth is that God himself is indeed hidden in the barrier. I've often had these emotions during my journey that became intimidated with the process of the journey. Does that make sense? Like I just became intimidated by it. There's been very few things in my life that intimidate me or scare me. But I don't understand why I would begin to feel intimidated. And it wasn't that I was intimidated because I didn't feel like I could achieve it. I got intimidated because I felt like it was impossible to achieve. You hear what I'm saying? Like if I had the opportunity, I could do this. But I saw the opportunity as an impossible option. I just couldn't see how it could happen.
Oh, I see. You saw it as an opportunity that never would come away.
Correct. And therefore I couldn't achieve it. It wouldn't happen. And became so discouraging that I wanted to just quit. I just wanted to quit. And I look back over the 7 or 8 years of sincerely focusing and knowing where I was wanting to go, but saw the impossibility of how I was going to do it. I thank God that I just continued to take one step at a time. I didn't try I realize at some point you are powerless to make some things happen. But now that I look back, I realize even though I haven't completed the envisioned goal of where I would want to be, I realize the joy is actually living through each step. And if I would have, can you imagine how much we miss in life because we always think we're going to be happier at another place? Right? When I get to this place, I'm going to be happier, content, things will be better. If I could only get this much money, or if I could only have this kind of house, or if only I could have these types of relationships, if I had all of that, everything would be great. But come to think about it, now that we know human nature, a person that is obsessed on the materialism or obsessed on trying to transform everybody into their own paradigms is going to be a person that everything was right, they would still be unhappy. Right? Because obstacles to them is always existential, right? Outside of them. The obstacles has nothing to do with them. People are obstacles, things are obstacles, but it's not for their improvement. It's just to get in their way and to annoy them. And that's a person who misses out on growing in life. It's a person who completely misses it. It may take a lot of effort for a person to break the barriers confronting him when he starts to draw closer to God. Many people experience opposition from their parents, their in-laws, wives, etc., so and so, but all their effort produces a vessel. Within this vessel, he can receive the holiness and purity he will attain thereafter. The greater the struggle one has on the outset, the greater the vessel one forms. In the end, it will be worthy of true fear of heaven. He will receive abundant blessing and goodness. He will be worthy of giving perfection to the holy name of God. So the idea is this: the more that your obstacles come, the bigger the vessel. And the best analogy as I have is if somebody is a runner, you expand your lung capacity. And when you expand your lung capacity, it gives you greater ability to run longer. There is an exercise they do with Olympians, and my goodness, now that I can't remember what it's called. I can tell you about the exercise, but I can't remember what it's called. But anyway, they'll take them in a pool, Olympic-sized pool. Say, well, they test the peak flow with their peak flow meter, but then they put them in a pool, and they swim laps. They'll swim a whole lap holding their breath, a whole lap breathing at a certain cycle, breathing air in, a whole lap holding their breath. And so you would think it's counterintuitive to building stronger lung capacity. But because he's holding his breath, his lungs are training to use less oxygen. Right? It's building up its ability to use less oxygen. So when he does breathe in, every bit of oxygen that he breathes in gets used. Does it make sense? All the oxygen, it's an amazing thing. So these cyclists, the guys that do like the big marathons in France and all this stuff, this is how they train to go 20, 30, 40 miles 3 or 4 times, 3 or 4 times during a week. That's just easy stuff for them. And they're going up high mountains and steep canyons. They do this because they've increased their capacity. Why? How did they increase their capacity? It wasn't through just sitting on the couch breathing. It was through struggle, stretching the lungs to a capacity that most of us can't do. Last but not least, here we go. The greatest barriers of all are those in our mind. The heart is slippery. People do not concentrate their entire heart and mind on the true importance of what they need to achieve. For example, when a person wants to travel to the Zadik and he starts to experience difficulties, if he really concentrates with his whole heart and mind on the fact that his entire life and being and that all of his descendants depend on him reaching this goal, nothing in the world could stop him. So what does that mean? If you knew that your great-great-grandchildren absolutely depend on you connecting to Hashem, you would do it. I wish that my forebears would have had the spiritual wherewithal to maintain a level connection with Hashem, so that now at my age I wouldn't have to be fighting so hard to have just to find him. And many people have recognized it. Great tzaddiks have recognized it. And there are amazing sages of Judaism that are born right now, that are studying yeshiva at 11 years old, have never seen an evil thing in front of their eyes because their fathers' fathers had the wherewithal to realize that my connection to Hashem and becoming Israel is more important than life itself. And if all of us in this room can recognize that deep down inside of us, the mazel of our name, not your Bob, Sally, Mary, Joseph, Christy, it doesn't matter. We're not talking about that. We're talking about what makes you up as a human being. Your mazel is very important. And that mazel has to be not the mazel of the old person, of what you used to be, but the mazel of the person that Hashem wants you to be. And if we can connect to that mazel as if our descendants' life depends on it, your great-grandchildren one day will enjoy, God willing, if everything continues to go well, will one day enjoy the great life of a connection to Hashem as a young child, because you've put the effort in now. And that's why when we read the story of Israel versus Jacob, or Jacob versus Israel, we're now looking at 2,700 some odd years later. We're on the backside of almost seeing redemption take place again, and the ingathering of the Jewish people back to the state of Israel. We're seeing redemption unfold before our eyes, the potential of Mashiach coming right in our own age. Why? Because Israel contended with God. Because Israel, that dark night, contended with Hashem. We now sit here as people of the nations, being able to connect to Hashem. What a blessing. That concludes the class. Any more questions, answers, fears, doubts, unbeliefs?